the conditions in your life, they can fulfill you for a while, and then it's no longer fulfilling. This happens to relationships, it happens to jobs that you find, activities. Unless you go deeper, nothing is fulfilling for very long. You are not a set of problems that you need to resolve. So let's go back to that beautiful, very simple realization that you don't need to remember anything about what your mind tells you who you are. It doesn't mean that you now have lost all your memories. No, they are still there if you need them. They come back. Whatever analogy you want to use, I used to say the filing system, when you need it, you can pull it out, but they don't use it anymore. So it's a computer analogy you use now. It's there somewhere in your computer. It's all still there. When you need it, of course, it's still there. But does it have to be there always when you don't need it? That continuous, the problematic self-talk, do you need to be burdened and walk around every day of your life burdened by the problem-making? Well, it's pretending to be problem-solving, but it's really problem-making of your mind, and to carry around with you the heavy entity, the me, which goes. And you're trying to get to a point, at some future point, you think I'm going to be liberated and free of all that, and then I will start living. And many people, even if they don't verbalize it as I do right now, the underlying mindset is, when I can free myself from all these problems, then I can start living. And that, of course, when you are 25, you can still believe that. When you're 35, you say, yeah, it can still happen. And when we become 45 and 50, okay, maybe I'll really start living when I retire. And then you begin to live for the retirement. Okay, only another 3 years now. And finally, the day comes, and then on the first day of your retirement, you sit at home and say, what now? Who am I without my function, my social function? But nobody's telling me who I am anymore. What am I going to do now? And then you try golf. And you drive around in the golf buggies. And for a few weeks it feels good, and you can drink and so. And then that dissatisfaction returns. The same mindset is still there despite your retirement. In fact, you become more aware of the dissatisfied mind now that you don't have to have that many external problems anymore, and yet there's still the heaviness of the mind and the discontent. So that's not the way to go. So the wonderful news is there is a dimension in you that we could call the dimension of depth, or the transcendent dimension, where you as the person become something else, where the person can only really often compare the person that you are to the ripple on the surface of the ocean. That's the person. But the ripple is one with the totality of the ocean. If the ripple doesn't know that, its existence is problematic, fearful. You fear every other ripple, or you want them to incorporate them into your life. Maybe if we come with me, together we'll be a bigger ripple. Marry me. and you will make me happy, and I will make you happy. It has been tried many times. So to lead a satisfying existence as a ripple that only knows itself as the ripple and not as the ocean is very frustrating. You can't, doesn't work. So the ripple needs to realize that it is much deeper than just the ripple. There's a depth to the ripple where it's no longer a ripple, where it's connected with everything and with every other ripple, where it's connected with the heart of the universe, not just on a human level. And that is true awakening. And after that, and when that is realized, and the ripple can sense that, it's a stillness in you, a presence that has no particular content, then the ripple becomes relatively happy. It doesn't mean in the world, on the surface of ripples, things still can go wrong, still things can disappear and break down, and ripples never last for very long. That continues, and yet you feel you can actually enjoy your ripple identity and enjoy the surface of life also. It's actually quite nice. Here, look at all those little ripples. And ripple means whatever you perceive in this analogy. Ripple means whatever life form is there in your perception, including yourself, and whatever, whether it's humans or whatever you perceive in this existence, it is the manifestation of life, of the one life that has manifested as a multiplicity of life forms. And each life form is inhabited by the one life, a manifestation of the one life or the one consciousness. So when you realize that, and that's the beginning of that realization is to sense the I that has nothing to do with your past or your future or your name or anything your mind is saying. Your simple presence. That means the ripple is becoming aware of something much bigger. And suddenly we have a relatively happy ripple. And it can enjoy every moment of its ripple existence in a sense of wonder, because it's no longer demanding that things that are not permanent should be permanent. And it's not demanding anymore that the surface existence of things should satisfy me. You're here to satisfy me. You're here to make me happy. You're here to fulfill me. The surface of the ripple can't do that. The conditions in your life, they can fulfill you for a while, and then it's no longer fulfilling. This happens to relationships, it happens to jobs that you find, activities. Unless you go deeper, nothing is fulfilling for very long. And so, this is why we are here, and this is the meaning of retreat. It's a retreat from yourself in order to find what the Buddhists would call the no-self, or what other teachings would call the deeper self, or the Atman, or your Buddha nature, or the Christ within, whatever term you want to use to point to it. And that's why we're here. So all the external things here are helpful. It's easier here to connect with the depths of who you are and realize the depths of who you are. Of course, when you leave here, then you get challenged again. It's not that you don't get challenged here too, and especially if you're still very much identified with the mind, you find many challenges wherever you go. This isn't right. Don't like that. He doesn't look very spiritual to me. Or the opposite, all these people are so much more spiritual than me. Do they know that I'm not spiritual? So the practice is to voluntarily, as much as possible, relinquish identification with the thinking mind and your usual self. And what very much helps with that is just as much as you can. Don't walk around as a heavy personality and person No, walk around as a light, as a field of conscious perception, and like a little child that goes and look at everything. In other words, presence practice. Here, it's more easier than in your usual surroundings. Presence practice, present moment practice. When you go beyond your conditioning, you reach a place where you give the greatest gift to other humans that you can give, and that is the gift of There's the story that you may have heard. There's a man sitting in a small town in a cafe, an old man, and a man approaches him and says, "Oh, are you a native here? You live here?" "Yes." And the man says, "I'm thinking of moving here. Do you think it's a good place to live? And what are the people like here?" And the old man says, "Well, what were the people like where you used to live?" And the man says, "Well, they were dreadful. They are dishonest, deceitful, full of envy and malice. I just can't stand that place anymore. I have to get out." "Okay." Then the old man says, "It's very much the same here." And the next day, the old man sits again in the cafe, and somebody else turns up by coincidence and says, "My wife and I are thinking of moving here because we like this town. What are the people like?" And the man says, "Well, what are the people like where you come from?" And he says, "Oh, they're great. They're helpful, kind, couldn't be nicer people." And the old man says, "It's very much the same here." And of course, the old man is right. You create according to your conditioning. The conditioning, to a large extent, determines the way in which you experience other people and reality. And when you go beyond your conditioning, you reach a place where you give the greatest gift to other humans that you can give, and that is the gift of your pure attention. When you look at somebody and you give them attention, there's an outflow of energy towards them. Just look, and attention means you're not, pure attention is you're not labeling anymore. It's not, you're just looking, perceiving, and there's an outflow. Perhaps they are talking to you. There's an outflow, attention is energy. Or you give attention to a child. Many parents can't do that because they're continuously saying to the child, do this, don't do that, now we must do that, get ready for this. There's always something, there's never pure attention, or rarely. There's always something to sort out and to make better. Of course, those things have their place. Brush your teeth, of course they need to brush their teeth, but if that's the only reality of do this, do that, come to, there's never that spaciousness which is attention, giving it to the other. And the child can feel that. If you give a child, you just look at the child and you listen to the child, or look. It's a beautiful thing. There's a flow. And then something comes back to you from the other, because ultimately attention is a form, we could almost say a form of love, in a deeper sense. There's a giving, an outflow. Of course, it's not your personal, it's not something of your personal belonging that you give. Attention comes through you. It doesn't come from you. It comes through you from the divine, the one consciousness. And you become an opening for that. And then the way in which you experience reality changes dramatically. So a wonderful shift happens. Situations are no longer, the life in general is no longer perceived as hostile. It becomes helpful. So that. And again, when you look at a tree or you listen to the sounds, that's the outflow of attention. And that's attention, of course, is just a word. It's a mysterious, ultimately unnameable energy that goes, it has no form. Oh. And you can become an opening for that, and then it begins to live through you, that essence, and express itself through you. In what form it expresses itself varies from person to person. But it could just be that you become more, you stay where you are and become more kind and loving, and not because you're thinking, I need to be kind and loving. That doesn't work. You can try very hard. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, I'll try. Except that guy and that one. When you feel that something is living through you without being obstructed anymore. It was living through you before also, but only a trickle. It's a little bit like, let's imagine you are a ripple on the surface of the ocean, and the ripple, for a moment, which is a lifetime for the ripple, forgets that it is part of the ocean, and it's only an expression, a brief expression of the totality in this particular form. And the ripple thinks, I'm a ripple. That's my life. That's my ripple life. My life. The ripple thinks that its life is its own. It doesn't know it is the ocean. And then, of course, the ripple becomes unhappy. It doesn't realize that it is the ocean. But once the ripple realizes it is the ocean, and now we have to let go of this analogy, because then something happens to the ripple that would not happen to a normal ripple. That's why we're letting go. It becomes a beautiful formation suddenly. Oh, and now the ocean is expressing itself fully through that. So use every moment here. And when I say every moment, it's not entirely correct. There is no such thing as every moment. There's only this moment. Well, I've never met any other moment. I can't find any other. It's always been this moment. So in language one says every moment or many moments, but ultimately there's no such thing. There's only the appearance of many moments, because there's always something different that arises, that changes all the time. In the space of consciousness, things arise and subside and arise and subside. Thoughts, emotions, perceptions, experiences come and go. And so when you only see the surface, then you think everything that arises, this is one moment that arises, and one moment that arises, and the next moment that. But of course it's not really like that, because it all arises in the present moment, which is eternal. And the present moment, the deeper meaning of it, of course, is that the present moment is consciousness itself. That's what the real meaning of the power of now is. What the now is. It's not what happens. The now, in its deeper sense, is not what happens. It's the space in which everything happens. And that space is eternal, in other words, timeless. And that space is you, in your essence. Oh. But this is not, of course, something to believe in, but to sense that spaciousness in you as that which underlies all perceptions and all thinking. So the shift in consciousness, or the evolutionary leap in consciousness, is from being exclusively identified with form, the me, the thought forms of me, to being rooted in the dimension of the formless. So this is why I sometimes say, although again, don't take these words as absolutely true, they're only temporary pointers. One could almost say there are two halves to who you are. And most humans only know one half, which is the form, their physical form and their psychological form, the ideas they have about themselves, the stories, and so on. That's the one half is your form identity. The other half, which most humans don't know themselves as, is the more essential, the essence of identity that is formless, that you cannot know. The other half you can know, but the formless essence identity, you cannot know it because it is the essence through which everything is known. This is why it's sometimes called the I, the eternal I am. The true meaning of retreat is not just leaving your usual surroundings, going into a peaceful place that is conducive to becoming serene, but the real challenge and it comments according to its conditioning, and this becomes the conditioned me entity that most people are identified with, this conditioned me entity that forms the basis for most people. And when I say most, I mean all those who have not even begun to awaken spiritually. It forms the sense of identity for most people, the whatever your mind is saying, its opinions, its likes and dislikes, its viewpoints, its mental positions, its grievances, its all the things that in most people you find are quite repetitive. When you start living with a person, you get to know their mind, and you begin to notice it's quite a repetitive thing, that they're deeply entrenched in there. And some people are very strongly identified with the voice in the head, which more often than not, is critical and looking for the next thing to criticize or complain about. Very much encouraged at universities, critical thinking. Recently I read an article by a professor in the New York Times. He actually recognized critical thinking up to a point is quite useful, but when you go too far, it's very destructive. You can no longer appreciate anything. You can approach a work of literature, see why it is immediately criticized without open yourself to it first. And when you are immersed in the critical mind, there's nothing creative there. You can only tear things down. So you're critical of other people, critical of what you read, critical of this, critical of your surroundings. And many ego entities, which is the identification with the voice in the head, are in that state of continuous dissatisfaction, which always just underneath the surface there is a latent dissatisfaction. And they're just waiting for the next excuse so that the latent dissatisfaction can emerge and think, why don't they should have, you should have, they should. And if you can't do it to others, you do it to yourself. Why didn't I should have? And all amazing what the burden that you carry as this conditioned entity that you mistake for who you are, not realizing all it is the workings of your mind, conditioned by the culture that you grew up in, your family background, your surroundings, things that happened to you, things that you did, were done to you, your parents, school, all those things. That's mental conditioning. That forms the person or the personality, and it has emotions that accompany the conditioned self, and they also often amplify the mental patterns. Or depression. So the retreat is the retreat from that. We're not here to change that. Change sometimes happens when you no longer usually happens, a lot of change happens when you don't identify with it anymore, but that is not the main purpose. We're not here to change the conditioning of your mind. There's a place for that. There are workshops you can take that change the conditioning of your mind, and that's like improving the furnishings in the place where you live. You put in better furniture and you feel a bit better. But it's still a prison. There's still the bars on the window. So the true meaning of retreat is the retreat from your usual self, from your usual mentally constructed, mentally, emotionally constructed self. And if everything else is really happens on the surface of life. Now, what happens on the surface of life can be very helpful, and this is why we're here. It can be very helpful. It helps you to begin to let go of your identification with your usual self. And then realize, and of course many of you have already started or are well into that process of disidentification, which we could also call the awakening process. Most of you are already engaged in the awakening process, has become initiated in you, and then you are here in order to deepen it. And some of you may not yet even know, there may be a few who may not even know at this moment what I'm referring to when I say awakening. But you will. Unless you run away tomorrow already. Just give yourself a chance. So there is the surface self, that is the usual self that everybody has. And for many people who have not yet awakened, that's all they have, or all they think they have. It's like saying you have an enormous amount of wealth, but you don't know it. So it's as if you didn't have it. So when I say they don't have it, it really means they don't know that there is a deeper dimension to who they are. And that is the real meaning that is really true deprivation, of really not knowing who you are on the deeper level of your being. So there is the usual self, and there is the deeper self. And we are here retreating. The purpose is to retreat from the usual self and discover who you are underneath the usual self, who or what you are. And that discovery does not happen conceptually. After this retreat, on the last day, you may not be able to say much more about your real self, your true, deeper self, than you are now, and yet you might have experienced it very deeply and be in touch with it very deeply. But what can you say about it? What can I say about my deeper self? It's hard to say anything, because it does not live in the world of conceptualization. And you first encounter it in a moment of stillness, alert stillness, like now, where you don't need to know your name, you don't need to remember what your name is right now in order to be here fully. You don't need to remember your personal history right now in order to be here fully and be fully yourself. You do not need to remember your personal history in order to get that sense of being fully present and being fully yourself. And that's quite amazing. Whatever happens is happening in your life, in your relationships, in your work situation, in your finances, in your living situation. That's your life situation, and that is what occupies almost everybody's mind continuously. Me and my life. Now, there is another dimension in you that wants to emerge that is far deeper than me and my life. Your mind has come with you here. You couldn't leave it behind. And if your mind has certain patterns,
then those habitual patterns will, sooner or later, also surface here. And that's okay, as long as you know that this is most likely to happen. It's only your mind. There's nothing out here. It's the mind. So a great opportunity here is to be aware of your thought processes as you interact with other people, as you sit here, as you are in the dining hall, as you go for a walk in nature. And use all these situations to bring in awareness. I'll look at this in more detail now. First of all, you have nature here, magnificent nature. So you will be walking, you will be looking, you will be breathing and smelling, and you will be listening to the sounds, perhaps even touching the sand. There's plenty of it. A tree. So you use your senses, all your senses are there, and as you go about in between sessions, you interact with nature, and that's a great opportunity for allowing nature to help you to become still and present, rather than giving in to the hypnotism of the mind, with every thought wanting to draw your attention to it and saying, this is so important, I must think about this. And then you've disappeared. There's all that nature around you, but you are no longer there. The sacredness of nature suddenly is no longer there for you. So because your consciousness has been absorbed again by the mind stream. Very easy to happen, and most likely will happen many times in the next few days here, until the moment comes when you say, oops, this is what's going on. And then you have a choice of bringing your attention back to sense perceptions. Alertness returns. And you can, when you become familiar with the falling back into identification with the mind, and you might find that it says something that's, it's not happy with something. Or something isn't quite enough. Or there's something missing. I have that feeling, there's something. And then very quickly the mind interprets that feeling as, yes, that's what's wrong here. Now I know. If you are familiar with the human mind, you may be, then you know one of the underlying patterns is that it continuously seems to say, there's something not right, something is missing, it is not complete, I am not complete. Something is needed here, something needs to be added to this moment, to this situation. And then it formulates further thoughts on the basis of that original erroneous assumption. Once you recognize that pattern, then it is easier not to get drawn into it, at least not for too long. So, watch your mind as it becomes active, and then you have a choice of either allowing yourself to be drawn into proliferating mind streams. You might even want to get away from here. It's quite a common phenomenon on retreats. A certain percentage of people after the second day or even the first day says, "Get me out of here." Or you start looking up the flight information on the internet. Or you call a friend. "Well, there's something not right here. I'll tell you about it." So the opportunity is here for you to allow nature to bring you into that still awareness so that you can contemplate, experience all that wonderful nature around you without undue interference, by thinking. What is there to think about when you go for a walk on the beach here? Nothing. You can only fully experience it when you become still, and then you perceive through the stillness rather than through conceptualized thought, which interprets everything you see. Oh, this is that, and that's that, and that's that. And I don't like. So you use nature and come to your senses, as the expression goes. You come to your senses, but that implies that there is an awareness there that makes clear, unobstructed sensory perception possible. And then you're amazed how at the sacredness of that space through which you move here. And sacredness is not something that I could explain to you or to your mind, because the human mind says, "Just a second, sacredness, what does that mean?" You haven't explained that term. And that would be extremely hard, impossible to explain. It's a term that is no longer much in use these days. Sacredness, that's a holiness, even is the Germanic-based word. Sacredness, the Latin-based word, is the same meaning. But you can sense it the moment your attention rises and you go, and there you see the branch of the tree moving slightly. And there you see a bird flying across, and the waves. And suddenly there's the totality of that experience. But you as that egoic entity that carries a baggage full of your past with you and your unresolved problems, in the future perhaps they'll get resolved. And of course, then others arise. You move through nature as a field of presence, not a personality or a person with. In other words, this is an opportunity for you to let go of your life situation, as I call it. You might remember reading it. What I call your life situation, which is whatever happens is happening in your life, in your relationships, in your work situation, in your finances, in your living situation. That's your life situation, and that is what occupies almost everybody's mind continuously. Me and my life. Now, there is another dimension in you that wants to emerge that is far deeper than me and my life.